Come closer to the fire. They say the sea keeps its own calendar. Out in Port Orford, Oregon, a small white church stands on a windy bluff above the Pacific. Once a year, at exactly 3:17 in the morning, its bell rings a single note. No rope moves. No one climbs the stairs. And the town, half asleep, listens without knowing why.
The church itself is nothing dramatic. One room, clapboard siding painted the particular white that looks gray 11 months of the year, a squat steeple with a bell you could circle with both arms if you tried. It sits above Port Orford on a bluff that lets the wind arrive first before it decides what to do with the rest of town. From the highway, you see it between two firs, a small punctuation mark between forest and ocean. The bell used to ring for the usual reasons: Sunday mornings, weddings, the occasional funeral. Then, one winter in the late 1970s, it added its own hour. That year, a storm pinned the town down. The barometer dropped so fast, the fishermen at the co-op fell quiet without meaning to. Rain came sideways, then upward, then from directions maps don't use. Power flickered, failed, returned in embarrassed bursts. People slept in clothes, not because they feared disaster, but because tide and wind had decided to hold a meeting. At 3:17 a.m., when the wind found a lower pitch and the surf thudded instead of roared, the church bell rang once. A single, clear, measured note. Not frantic, not repeated. Just one. People woke all over town. Dogs lifted their heads and then put them back down because the sound asked for attention, not panic. Some thought it was a dream until they met each other at the market later and realized they'd all had the same one. The next morning, the pastor checked the belfry. The rope lay where it always did, loose on its peg, dry as anything could be after that night. No one admitted to climbing those stairs in that weather. The pastor wrote a line in his notebook. Bell rang once, no cause found. He didn't talk about it from the pulpit. Sermons have enough trouble already. The bell rang again the next year. Same night of the month, same kind of weather, same hour, 3:17. The storm was lighter, more bluster than intent. Still, the town had gone to bed listening. When the note came, it cut through the wind as if someone had cleared their throat at the wrong funeral. One tone, again. No echo, just the echo inside people who suddenly knew what time it was without needing to look. By the third year, it was no longer accident. The date lined up with the first one, down to the day. Calendars turned and turned, and when they arrived at that square, people went to bed a little slower. Some stayed up on purpose, the way you sit with a sick friend even when you can't do anything medical. In those early years, a few of the men decided to solve it with presents. They sat up in the church itself, 2 in the back pew, 1 in the vestibule, 1 on the stairs to the belfry. Flashlights, thermoses, the kind of gruff jokes that make time behave. The pastor had agreed, more to calm them than because he expected an answer. At 3 in the morning, nothing had happened. The wind pressed hands against the windows, then pulled them back. The heaters knocked once in the pipes and quieted. The men shifted in their clothes and began, privately, to feel foolish. At 3:17, the bell rang. The man on the stairs swears he had his hand on the rope the whole time. He felt nothing move under his fingers. No jerk, no sway. The sound came from above him, full and complete, as if someone had cut and pasted it straight into the air. They checked the hardware after. Bolt, wheel, yoke. Everything where it should be. No fresh scuff marks, no frayed fibers. No sign anyone had been in the tower. The men didn't try to spend the night there again. Curiosity has limits. Embarrassment has a shorter leash. After that, people stopped asking how and concentrated on when. The date circled itself now. The pastor made a quiet note each year in a leather-bound book no one else saw. The town adjusted its sleep. The person who finally tried to write it down properly was not a pastor or a fisherman. It was a woman from the post office. Her name was Mara Kinney. She ran the sorting room at the Port Orford branch and knew the town's pulse by zip code and handwriting. She could tell you when snowbirds came back by the weight of their catalogs, when a marriage was shaky by the frequency of single envelopes with official seals, when a kid left for college by the sudden appearance of out-of-state meal kit flyers addressed to parents who'd never sign up for such things. She first heard the bell on a year she'd forgotten to mark. The sound cut into a restless sleep. She thought she had dreamed a ship's bell at sea, something her grandfather used to talk about. The next day, customers mentioned it casually at the counter, the way you mention rain. Annoying, yet necessary. After 3 of those years, she built a small ledger of her own. On a fresh page, she wrote the date, time, weather, and then a column labeled simply, "Who mentioned it?" People came in for stamps and brought their small cargo of opinions. She didn't admit she was keeping track, because then the data would change. She just listened. Patterns drew themselves. People who usually slept through everything woke just before the bell. People who usually woke at every small noise slept past it, but remembered hearing it in what they insisted were dreams. The grocery owner at the corner swore his cooler compressor always paused right before 3:17 on that night and resumed a few moments after. The paramedic who worked nights said the ER never got calls on that hour. Before or after, sure, but not then. It was like the town held its breath, waiting for something it couldn't name. Mara herself noticed the quiet most in the sorting room. The automated canceling machines up in Coos Bay stamped the day onto envelopes at all hours. Their rhythm fed the trucks that fed her bins. But on the annual 3:17, no truck ever arrived on that minute. Schedules slid, tires delayed, routes rerouted, a dozen reasons that looked sensible on paper. The result was always the same. For a 60-second stretch in the middle of the night, nothing new came in. Then the bell rang, and the world resumed. One spring, the weather didn't cooperate. The forecasts kept threatening big systems, but the sky refused drama. The date approached in ordinary rain, then in a string of days so clear, fishermen began to suspect the bill. The town watched the clouds and whispered something close to worry. If the bell only rang in storms, what happened when the storm didn't show? Would the quiet fill with something worse? The evening came mild. No wind, no whitecaps, just the sound of the Pacific breathing like a heavy sleeper. People went to bed early and lay there awake. In the rectory, the pastor, now a different man, younger, hair not yet fully surrendered, sat at his desk with the leather-bound book open. 3 pages of neat annual entries waited for a 4th. He told himself it wouldn't matter if the pattern broke. Then he turned off the lamp and listened. At 3:15, the church was still. In the houses below, A few radios hummed so low they might as well have been memory. A possum shuffled under a porch. A truck shifted in its suspension. Little things. At 3:17, the bell rang. It sounded exactly as it always had. Not louder to compensate for the clear air, not softer out of politeness. The note hung a heartbeat longer because the wind wasn't there to steal it. It traveled down the hill, through thin curtains, along the shore, out over water that listened without answering. A crab boat 30 miles offshore, working a graveyard shift to beat the coming week's weather, caught the sound on the edge of a dream. The deckhand on duty looked up at an empty horizon and decided he had heard something from home. In the morning, the town relaxed in stages. No one said they'd been afraid of losing the bell. That would have been too dramatic. But the grocery owner mentioned his compressor had paused again on the minute, even without the storm. Mara added a line in her ledger. Clear night, pattern holds. It wasn't about the weather then. The storm was decoration. The bell had its own reason. Every community collects one bad year that arranges the rest around it. For Port Orford, that year came with smoke. A dry summer tilted into something worse. A small brush fire upriver met wind and ambition. Crews fought hard and won badly. One night in August, the smoke reached the coast. It turned the sunset into something people would have photographed if it hadn't been an accusation. The date circled itself again. People wondered if, this time, the bell might be busy. The town was on edge for reasons that had nothing to do with churches. Ash fell on parked cars. Kids coughed at recess. The mayor handed out masks from a cardboard box that still smelled like another state's warehouse. The ocean did its part and dragged cool in from the horizon, but the sky seemed to resist being fixed. On the night the bells should ring, the town went to bed with the windows shut tight. The usual sound of rain had been replaced by a hush that felt padded. In the post office, a fine layer of ash dulled the gloss of the counter. Mara wiped it once, then left the rest. Some grime belongs to the year. At 3:17, the bell rang. The note carried differently through smoke. It came thick, like a light shining through a dirty lens. It still reached everyone. Patients in the small care home heard it, as if someone had stood at their doors with a tuning fork. A volunteer watching the fire line above town swore afterwards that, for a moment, the flames nearest the ridge leaned away, like grass under wind. That part is hard to prove. The line held, though. Embers that might have hopped down into trees near the bluff seemed to change their minds. The next morning, the fire's edge had stopped just short of the old cemetery above the highway. The crews took the credit. They deserved a lot of it. Down at the harbor, a few people mentioned the bell, not as cause, as witness. Mara's ledger entry for that year was shorter than usual. She wrote simply, "Smoke still rang." Then she closed the book and went back to sorting. You can only accumulate so many coincidences before someone from the outside tries to make a chart. In time, that someone was a graduate student from Corvallis named Isaiah. He arrived with a grant, 2 digital recorders, and the kind of earnestness small towns both like and fear. His project: document unexplained cyclical acoustic phenomena in coastal communities. The church bell was one of 3 examples. The other 2 he never got to. Not really. He interviewed everyone he could bully into 15 minutes. The pastor, the fisherman, the grocery owner, the nurse from the care home, even Mara at her sorting table. He asked about prior trauma on that date: shipwrecks, accidents, an old pastor's death. The town produced nothing satisfying. There were always deaths, always storms, always smaller sorrows. Nothing lined up cleanly at 317. No neat story of a lost child or a ship going down on the minute. He installed microphones in and around the church weeks in advance. He placed one under the bell itself, one in the stairwell, one in the sanctuary, one outside facing the town, one facing the sea. He checked battery levels obsessively. Data, he thought, would finally respect him. The night arrived. This time, the sky went with rain, a steady Pacific pour, less dramatic than the storms of the past, more honest. The town slept. The graduate students sat cross-legged in the back pew, laptop balanced, headphones on, watching the recording levels creep along the screen like cautious animals. At 317, he heard the bell in his bones before he heard it in his ears. The note on the graphs spiked across every channel at once: inside, outside, stairwell, sea. The microphone mounted up under the bell's metal showed no leading edge of vibration, no preliminary shudder. The sound arrived fully formed, as if the bell had jumped from stillness to ringing without passing through motion. On the waveform, it looked like a wall. He listened to the recording the next day in the church office with the pastor, and at her quiet insistence, Mara. The audio was clear, almost too clean. No rope creak, no shoe on stair, no breath. Just the bell, then the rain. Isaiah's final report ran to 60 pages. It ruled out prank, hoax, mechanical timers, environmental triggers he could measure. It landed on a phrase that department heads tolerate but do not enjoy: stable unknown. The university archived the recording, labeled the project complete, and reallocated the grant money to something less stubborn. Isaiah returned once, years later, on a regular night. Not the date. He sat in the same pew, listened to the empty church, and then walked down to the water. That's where he admitted to himself what the waveform had already told him. Some things you measure because you need to, not because measurement will change them. Time does what it does. Pastors change. Fishermen sell their boats or pass them down. Students leave and talk about their small hometowns in larger apartments elsewhere. The church gets painted. The road stripes get redone. The ocean keeps attacking the same rocks with the same long patience. The bell rings. Every year, on the same square of the calendar, at the same minute, whether storm or clear, whether people remember to be listening or not. Parents with babies learn about it their first winter. Teenagers use it as a dare, walking up to the church in 2s and 3s, trying to be casual. Old couples on the bluff porch wrap quilts around their knees and wait, claiming they just like the air. Mara grew older, sorting other people's news. Her ledger filled several pages, then another book. She never put them on display. On her last year before retirement, she added a small final note after that date's entry. It's enough that it happens. Then she closed the cover and left it in the top drawer of the desk for whoever would take over. Visitors passing through hear the story in pieces at the diner or the gas station. Some roll their eyes. Some mark their map. A few actually stay the night to see. The bell never performs for them. It just keeps its habit. Once a year, one clear tone, 3:17 a.m., then back to being metal in the wind. I stood on the hill behind the church one of those nights. not for research and not for faith, just to see whether time really could mark itself without a hand. The town below was mostly dark. A single porch light glowed over a house with a dog that had given up pretending not to be afraid of thunder. The ocean sounded close and farther away than it actually was. When the bell rang, it felt less like a question and more like a head count. Not of people, though some of us stirred, of the town itself. A way for the place to ask once a year if it was all still here. The bluff, the trees, the boats, the roads, the humans who come and go faster than any of that. The note didn't require an answer. The continuing existence of everything under it was answer enough. After it faded, the rain went on. A truck gear shifted somewhere down on 101. A refrigerator in a kitchen below us cycled back on. Somewhere, probably, someone turned over in bed without knowing why. The bell waited another year.
Not every sound needs a hand behind it. Some ring because a place refuses to lose its count. In Port Orford, a small church on a windy bluff keeps its one appointment at 3:17 a.m. once a year, whether anyone is listening or not. If you ever find yourself there on that night, don't crowd the hill. Just lie awake with the town. Let the bell pass through your walls. And remember that somewhere, something is keeping time on your behalf, even when you forget to.